friends, my name is Caitlin. Welcome to my channel. I'm so happy you're here because today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of June. And I did a video that recaps some of the books I read in June, but those were all about race, so I'll link that below if you want to check that out. Today I will be talking about all the other books I read. Before I talk about the books that I actually read, I did want to talk about a book that I did not finish. I usually probably won't bring up the books I don't finish unless I have something to say about them, and I have something to say about this book. The book I did not finish was I'm blanking on the name, the new Hunger Games book, Song of Ballads, Songbirds, something. I already forgot. Here's the thing. I love the Hunger Games. I do. The original series, I was a huge fan. So I was really excited to hear that a new book was coming out, and I was a little disheartened that it was about President Snow, because do I really want to read a book about a dictator and his origin story? Not really, especially right now. But I thought I'd give it a go. And I got about 50% of the way through, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. The writing was good. I still think Suzanne is a talented writer. I don't understand why she chose to write a book about Snow. It would have been fine if we saw like the steady decline of him turning into a terrible person, but he starts off the story as a total ass and just keeps on getting worse and worse. Like, there's no character development. It literally could have been about any other character in the book. It could have been about Cinna or Haymitch, or Mage. All of those would have been great origin stories I would want to read. This was not. And the part that bothered me the most is, I don't know how spoilery this is. I don't think it's very spoilery, but there's like a forced romance between Snow and his tribute that he's like not training, but like he's a mentor for. And I don't understand the point of it. I obviously don't know if it's touched on in the end of the book because I didn't finish it. So if it is, let me know. But I had a really big problem with a person in power, like, preying on the oppressed. Like, it was a romance between the oppressor and the oppressed. And no, not here for that. I had to stop reading. But now let's talk about the books I actually finished reading because they were good. I feel like June was a really long month for me, so like looking back on these books, I'm like, oh my god, I read that a year ago. No, it was just a month ago. The first book I want to talk about is In the Dreamhouse, a memoir by Carmen Maria Machado. And this is a memoir that looks into her life as being a gay woman, but it's also really it talks about being in an abusive queer relationship, which I have never read about before, and I certainly don't think this conversation is happening as often as it should be happening. The writing was raw and stunning, and I really felt connected with the author. I felt like I was inside of her head, and I really felt the weight of the years of abuse that she experienced. I thought her writing was so creative and poignant, and there was one chapter that was set up like a choose your own adventure that I just thought was mind-blowing. So I ended up giving this book 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry, and I've been really trying to push myself outside of my comfort zone. I usually don't read romance books, but I've been trying to read like 1 or 2 a month, and I was so pleasantly surprised by this book. It's been getting a lot of hype, and I think it deserves it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, which is like, has that ever happened in a romance? I don't know. I don't think so. It's like by far the best romance I've ever read. It's about like 2 authors that are enemies, and they were in the same writing program in college, and then a few years later they happened to be living in beach houses next to each other, and the characters were beautifully flawed and realistic, and I thought there was great discussions about what it looks like to be in a normal modern relationship when you do have not baggage, but you have a history, you have a past, and like you need to work through that on yourself and with your partner and be open and honest. And it was just adorable. My heart made me so happy. The next book I read is The Undocumented Americans, which was a really interesting kind of combination of memoir and journalism. The author looked at her life as well as the lives of undocumented Americans across the country. The accounts and stories that she told were really raw and heartbreaking and real, and so I think it's really, really important to read because of that, and just very sad and discouraging to see once again how little America cares for Black and brown people. The next book I read is a little different. It's a vampire book. I read The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh, and this is a vampire story that takes place in New Orleans in the 1800s, I believe. I ended up giving this book only 2 out of 5 stars. Here's the deal. I loved the New Orleans setting. I will read anything that takes place in New Orleans. I love it. It was beautifully creepy and awesome. And the female friendships in this book were fantastic. 10 out of 10 in that regard. However, the actual plot was just very slow to me. I didn't care. There was a mystery involved. Did not care about it. The romance, did not care. Did not believe it. And the big reveal plot twist at the end, could care less. Which makes me sad, because I think some of the characters in this book are cool and have potential, but the characters we focused on were just also, it kind of seemed like there was a setup for a love triangle in the next book, which also was not believable for me, so I will not be continuing with this series. The next book I read, very interesting. It's Wonderland by Zoje Steg? I have no idea how to say it, and I'm so sorry. This was marketed as Shirley Jackson meets The Shining, which I absolutely agree. It's one of the strangest, weirdest books I've ever read in a very good way. I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I'm still kind of processing what I read, which I think is kind of awesome as a reader, to leave a book just wondering what? I also think if you like Rory Powers writing, I think you would really like this. If you're into horror and almost body horror kinds of things, very interesting. It's about this family that moves to kind of an isolated farmhouse, and crazy things start to happen with the nature around them. And there's this tree in the backyard, and crazy shit happens. And something happens, I think it's almost even in the first 100 pages, that I just did not see coming for some reason. And I probably should have, because it is a horror book, but I'm so intrigued by it. If you're into horror, I highly recommend you pick it up. If you're not into horror, stay far away from this. It will terrify you. I then read another memoir called Good Morning, Destroyer of Men's Souls. Long title, but I love it, and the cover is gorgeous, as you can see. This is a memoir about loving an addict and living a life where you're consumed by that. And I thought it was such an important book. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. This was just really raw and honest, and she was honest about everything she's done in her life. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She took ownership of what she did, which I really loved. And I really loved how it explored the dangers of codependency, especially when loving and living with an addict. I think this is such an important conversation to be having that isn't really talked about a lot. I think we talk about addiction and addicts a lot, which absolutely needs to be talked about 100%. But we forget that addiction affects everyone surrounding an individual who's addicted. So I think it's very, very important. And finally, the last book I want to talk about is Burn by Patrick Ness. This is his latest novel, and Patrick Ness is one of my all-time favorite authors. I think he's absolutely brilliant. This is a YA story about kind of an alternative history that takes place in the 60s where there's dragons. Yes. Oh, and there's a cult. So the first half of this book, I was like, this is everything I've ever wanted a book in my entire life. It covered so many things. It also covered racism and homophobia and hate crime and police brutality and internment camps. It just covered everything, and I was loving it. And then there was like a twist in the middle, which Patrick Ness does. And the rest of the story just fell flat for me, the second half of the book. It seemed like a little rushed, and the conclusion seemed a little convenient, and I wasn't a fan of the ending. But the first half was like a 5 out of 5 star, and then the rest of it was like a 2, 1 star. So I ended up giving it 3 out of 5. Well, those are all the books that I read this past month in June. If you are interested in reading any of those books, please buy them from a Black-owned bookstore, which I have linked down below. If you've read any of these books and you want to talk about them, please let's chat in the comments. Follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram. Let's be friends. Let's hang out. If you like me and talking about books, maybe subscribe. I'll be back soon talking more about books. I look like a freaking crazy person right now. Okay. That's it. That's the end. Bye.